We are live. My name's JP Berg, and this is The Way Forward, our first episode, a podcast which will be recurring weekly at this time slot, covering Douglas social credit. So, Douglas social credit was very popular in Canada about 100 years ago, and then moving forward. But oddly enough, I just learned about this about a month ago. So I'm so intrigued by it that I'm a full convert at this point. So I thought it would be good to put this podcast together just to bring this information to other Canadians. So joining me and my co-host for this project will be Dr. Oliver Heydorn and Mr. Andre Meloche. So we're going to jump right into it, guys. Why don't you tell us a bit, like a broad explanation of Douglas social credit, Oliver?
All right. Well, I was thinking about this afternoon, and I thought, given the particular context we're in now, politically, we should make it clear from the outset that Douglas social credit has nothing to do with Chinese social credit or globalist social credit. They're basically opposites, in fact. So what's happened is the other side has appropriated the term social credit to describe a system that is actually the very opposite of what Douglas intended. So just very briefly, in the Chinese globalist social credit, you're basically empowering the state or the government to watch the citizens and to reward or punish them depending on how well they comply with government or state policy, right? Douglas social credit had the exact opposite idea. The whole thrust was to empower the common citizens, empower them, enfranchise them to watch, to survey the politicians, the bureaucrats, business people, anybody who held power in society, and to be able, through effective sanctions, to reward or punish them, depending on how well they serve our policy, how well they serve the common policy. So the difference between them, it's a 180. And I think the term social credit, what most people now know as social credit, was introduced around 2014 or so. But this social credit, Douglas social credit, goes back to 1917. It was a big thing in the 1920s and 1930s, in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, even in Canada. And since about the 1970s, 1980s, it's been sent down the Orwellian memory hole. So that's just a brief statement of what Douglas social credit is not. Now, perhaps either of you want to comment on that before we sort of move on to describing more positively what it is.
Well, yeah, we'll let Andre say hello to everyone. And you can maybe explain briefly, Andre, how you got involved with Douglas social credit, because I know you've just learned this yourself within the last couple of years.
I've learned it last year when I met Dr. Heydorn, and I read his book, Social Credit Economic, and I was very surprised that I didn't know this economic system. As I'm not an economist, you cannot expect to know all economic policies, but I was very surprised and delighted to read the book. The book is not easy, but also it explained many aspects of macroeconomy that I was not aware of. Then the other thing that I've discovered is that the system of Douglas is non-partisan. It's not left against right. It's not globalist against nationalist. I think it is trying to unite people in a more fair system and avoid what we will most probably talk about, monopoly of credit, the monopoly of life, terms like scarcity, the fact that they will create scarcity to control the means of production. Those are things that I've discovered through the book of Oliver, and also through conversation that we had. And also, maybe I will talk later about Diane Boucher, who was an economist. And what struck me is that Douglas was an engineer. So he was looking at economic system with an engineer perspective. And that was very interesting because it is rational. I think we have to try to remove the emotional part of the analysis to try to explain it and make it simple to understand.
Yes, I agree. And I would add it's very pro-citizen. Like you look at this false dialectic of capitalism versus socialism. And it's one like our form of capitalism, I would make an argument, is not capitalism any longer. It's more similar to neo-feudalism. But one is an oligarchy of like international finance, which is kind of where we are now. We're very close to that, like a full fascist style system. And the other is a dictatorship of the proletariat. Like it's the monopoly factor. Having the monopoly on credit creation is what ensures we would be subjugated. So I mean, it's a very pro-citizen policy in that mind and pro-liberty.
Mm-hmm.
But with that said, Oliver, why don't you get into a bit of a breakdown? Take your time with this one too, because
Okay.
I know it's going to be a bit more complex. But get down to a bit of a breakdown of what this system is and how it functions.
Right. So social credit, the original social credit, was developed by the British engineer Major C.H. Douglas, as we've been saying. And just to give you some historical context, he was born in 1879 and died in 1952. And the very first article on what became known as social credit was written in 1917. And Douglas wrote many, many books, many articles, gave speeches. He spoke before the King of Norway. He gave evidence at the Canadian Banking Inquiry in 1923, before the British Macmillan Committee in 1930. So he was a person of some standing. And, throughout his life, throughout his works, he was basically looking at this relationship between the group and the individual, and what should be the proper relationship obtaining between them. So what we call social credit, it's got a philosophical dimension. Douglas had an elaborate political theory with a diagnosis for what's wrong with the political system and how it could be remedied. And he had a historical theory to help explain the role of various factors in the progress or otherwise of civilization. But what he's most well known for is his financial diagnosis and his economic views. So, Douglas social credit starts with the observation that there's something fundamentally wrong with the existing money system. It doesn't accurately reflect reality. And the only way it can work well and serve the common interest is if it were to reflect reality. So this will be a bit of a digression, but I'll try to keep it brief. I have here in my hand a $20 note, and I've got a couple of coins. Most people, when they think of money, they're thinking about something physical, right? Paper notes. Well, this is plastic, or a minted coin. And those forms of money, those physical forms of money, are in Canada something like 5% or less of the whole money supply. So the bulk of the money supply is actually intangible. It's not physical. It's bank credit. And it's something that is created every time a bank, a private bank, makes a loan or a purchase. And it's just numbers and accounts, basically. And when those loans are repaid, and when the purchases are sold to the public, the money, the bank credit, is destroyed. So you have a money system that is creating money in the form of bank credit mainly, and money is also being destroyed as it cycles through. So what Douglas said was, when we look at the money that's spent on production in this system, so we see something very interesting. He said, the money spent generates costs and prices faster than it distributes incomes to consumers in the form of wages, salaries, and dividends. So there's a fundamental imbalance in the system, right? If the system were an accurate system, an honest system that reflected reality, it should pay us enough income to balance the costs and prices that are simultaneously being generated. But he said that actually, as a matter of fact, the system has this chronic underlying deficiency of consumer buying power that's built in, and it has mostly to do with capital costs. Businesses have to recover capital charges of various kinds, the financial charges, depreciation, maintenance from the consumer. But the consumer isn't being given enough money automatically in the form of income to meet those prices. Now, because we have a debt money system, for all intents and purposes, there are some exceptions. The only way that we can fill the gap, and the only way that I shouldn't say the only way, the main way that we fill the gap under the existing system is to get someone to borrow additional money from the private banking system. So, that's what government deficit financing is about. That's what all these consumer loans, lines of credit, mortgages, car loans, student loans are all about. That's what business borrowing more money for expansion in the hope that they can recover their costs in some future economic period is all about. And Douglas basically said that, this is unjust, it's inefficient, and it'd make far more sense, and it would benefit the common interest far more effectively if we simply measured the gap, monetized it with debt-free credit, and distributed it to people in the form of what he called a national dividend and a national discount. So the idea is we really shouldn't have to go to the banking system to get more money, which they can only give us as debt, in order to purchase in full what we've already produced. And this unbalance on Douglas's analysis, this is the fundamental problem, not just with the financial system, but with the whole of our civilization. It's like, finance is a sort of infrastructure, it's societal infrastructure, and it's got a bug in it. At least from the point of view of the average person, it's got a bug. And the bug is that it doesn't reflect reality. It generates costs and prices faster than it distributes incomes. But what is a bug from our point of view is a feature from the point of view of the credit monopolists, because by filling the gap with more and more debt, and you'll notice that public debt, consumer debt, business debt, it all tends to increase over time. It enables the owners of the banking system to centralize wealth, power, and privilege in their own hands. So from a very narrow point of view, it's serving their interests, but it's not serving the interests of the wider community.
So I'm going to jump in really quickly before I hand it over to Andre. I would like to appeal to the audience to share this stream. It's very advantageous for us. The only reach I really get is organic. So it would be very helpful if you could do that for us. So yeah, Andre, do you want to jump in and explain some of your understanding of this?
Well, Oliver mentioned something quite important, the concept of the debt, national debt, business debt, personal debt. And since the 70s, the debt has increased a lot by creating money, essentially, because you cannot, like Oliver mentioned, you cannot fill the gap between the cost of production and the income that are provided to the worker. So we haven't, it's not balanced. And I understood it's quite counterintuitive when you read Douglas. When I was reading Diane Boucher, she's saying the cost of production, or the retail price, or the just price, has to be lower than the cost of production. You ask yourself, how can it be possible that you have a lower cost, lower retail price or just price than the cost of production? I would like to refer to, let's say we are in the Garden of Eden, and there's no labor. Everything is available for everybody. And then suddenly Eve eats the apple and we are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and you have to start to work. Today, with the innovation and all the discovery we have, our life should improve. We should not be under the burden of astronomous debt. And we should be able to balance production of goods with consumption, which is not at all arriving, and we see it in all the domain because of what I was mentioning earlier, scarcity. People who control this system create scarcity to force the economy to borrow money and to increase the amount of money. Oliver was mentioning 5% of cash or 5% of physical money. 95% of the actual money is virtual. You can play with it, you can manipulate it, you can have a higher leverage. In 2008, just before the financial crisis, the ratio for banks for lending money was about 9-1. So for $1, you could create $9. You were not lending money, you were creating $9. In 2011-12, this ratio went up until up to 30-1, meaning that for $1 of liquidity, you can create $30 of debt. And we can see how the national debt explode after the 2008 crisis. It was still sustainable, but this system, like Oliver mentioned, it's based on a bug. It's embedded in the system that we will create money out of nothing and we will create scarcity. This is not normal in a society of abundance. We have a lot of resources. We do not use them properly, and you sometimes have a lot of resources in one domain that are available, and in another domain you have a scarcity. I think Douglas saw it, like I was saying, with the eyes of an engineer. He was trying to balance the production and the consumption, and he understood that it was not working for many reasons. I think Oliver maybe later will explain those reasons, because it's not only monopoly of credit, power, concentrating power, wealth means controlling politics. That's why I think Douglas was expecting that monetary reform should be non-partisan. It's not about the conservative or the liberal or the left or the right. It's about equity, about justice, fairness. And one last thing that I could say, this expression social credit, the other expression is economic democracy. In this, you have the word democracy means a society governed by the people, and you have the word economy, which means you control your economy. You cannot always rely on debt.
So I think the revolutionary aspect of this system, when I was learning about it, and I have very fresh eyes, I've been learning about this for slightly over a month now. I was fortunate enough to travel to Rougemont and attend the inaugural Douglas Social Credit Conference, which was a great time and very informative for me. But the revolutionary aspect is Douglas thought that the market should serve the people, not the people serving the market. And it reflects reality better. And the deficiency is definitely relevant. But that for me was the first thing I had to wrap my head around, because I'm coming out of a school of thought like Milton Friedman. Like the free market is this magnificent thing that just it brings so much prosperity without looking at any of the negative consequences. And I mean, a lot of people too, we have to think a lot of people aren't as well versed on these issues as we are. People don't even realize that it is a private banking, and international finance is a privately owned system. So, I mean, we're indebted to a private system that is taking advantage of this deficiency in our market. And that's how they're consolidating their power and influence. They inform our policies. And in many cases, this is speculative, I'll qualify it as conjecture, but in many cases, they're controlling our politicians. And I think that's becoming abundantly clear to lots of people these days. So if you want to speak to some of that, Oliver.
Well, I think the other perhaps big confusion that we should head off or clarify early on is to make it clear that Douglas social credit, as far as the monetary reform proposals are concerned, and Douglas's understanding of how the economy should function, it's got nothing to do with socialism, right? So before we had this confusion between CCP social credit and Douglas social credit, it was not uncommon for people to come across the original social credit and say, oh, it's got the word social in it, therefore it must be some form of socialism. And I want to make it clear that not only is Douglas social credit not socialist, it is rightly considered anti-socialist. Why? Because there's no central planning. It's not a command economy. There's no nationalization of the means of production. There's no redistributive taxation on the level, there's no welfare state. It would be the abolition of the welfare state. You're not going to have all this excessive bureaucracy and regulation, because a lot of that arises as the current system's way of handling the fallout from the gap and the conventional means of addressing it and dealing with it. So it's a market system. It's in favor of private property. It's in favor of the profit motive. It's in favor of competition. The basic idea is that we need to regulate money, which is the regulator of economic activity. It needs to be regulated in line with reality and the natural law, right? It has to reflect facts. If we as a community produce $100 million worth in goods and services, if that's what's appearing on one side of the ledger, then if the system were an honest system, if it reflected reality, there should be $100 million in income in the pockets of consumers. And if in the process of production, let's say only 60 million is distributed in wages, salaries, and dividends, then there's a gap of 40 million. Instead of filling it with debt, as we do now, because that's basically what we do, we can't buy everything that we need and that's on offer, so we have to charge, use the credit card, both collectively and as individuals. Instead of doing that, the system, in justice and as a matter of functionality, actually owes us that 40 million in the form of compensatory consumer credits. So if you introduce that, well, you don't need unemployment insurance. You don't need welfare. You probably don't even need public pensions as we know them. And all the bureaucracies that have been introduced to monitor these things, to basically ensure that people are not taking advantage of the system, so on and so forth, that's all waste, right? If you fill the gap in favor of the common citizen, a lot of these socialist measures, which have become necessary for the sake of maintaining social stability, they're no longer required. So while I would not qualify Douglas social credit as a species of libertarianism, pure and simple, nevertheless, I think the kind of economy which Douglas envisaged is actually, in terms of the size and power of government, in terms of the level of taxation, the size and power of bureaucracy, is actually, to speak in conventional terms, and I don't really like to speak in conventional terms, but it's actually further to the right than any existing economy. And I think it would give libertarians, it would deliver to them most of what they're looking for in terms of smaller, less powerful government. If you give everyone a dividend and a discount, well, we don't need an income tax. Why do we have an income tax? It's absurd. So it's social. In the case of social credit, means of or relating to society. He's not talking about socialism.
Go ahead, Andre.
Well, you were mentioning John Paul Milton Friedman, and what I've discovered through the book of Oliver, but also with my own research, comparing socialism and capitalism. I think, John Paul, you mentioned it a couple of times in some of other podcasts. The fact that in capitalism, capitalist system, you have some companies that control the means of production, apparently private company, and they're supposed to redistribute wealth through income, through work, and you have the socialist system, which is owned by the state, but it's always a small group of individual who controls the means of production and the redistribution. You think about private property, for example, if you have a small business and you are exempt of tax, you still need to make profit. So to live, or at least to cover your costs. So the system of Douglas is neither socialism and neither what we call classical capitalism, which is today not capitalism, which is today much more corporatism or corporatocracy, which they concentrate power at the top and then they redistribute the power. And in the book of Oliver, he was mentioning something very important. The system rewards people who will comply and promote this system, and the system will punish the companies that will not support the system. So they can control whoever they want to either subsidize or help, or finance, because banking, they can grant you a loan or not. So I think in one aspect, when we will go down more deeper in the doctrine of Douglas, we will have to explain all those concepts about what Oliver was mentioning, the national dividend, the initial dividend. Everybody would have a dividend at first, and then it will fluctuate. What?
There you are. You came back. You froze for a minute.
Oh, okay. Sorry. The initial dividend, meaning that you have some share of the country, and then after that it will fluctuate depending on the level of production. If the production is lower, your dividend will go down. So I think we can balance that. The other thing that I can just mention is usury, credit with interest, and Oliver mentioned it. Free credit, free credit. Doesn't mean that you don't pay back the money that you own. It means that you don't have monopoly on charging interest. Maybe this is one thing we will discuss in a further future podcast. What are the risks? How we manage the risk? Because risk management is based on, I lend you $1,000 and you tell me that you want to start a business. And if you flourish, maybe you will pay me back and maybe we will share the profit. So I think it's one aspect that we will have to explain to people. Try to make it more simple, not to oversimplify it, because this system touches many aspects of social life and economic and the economy of a country.
I think when we named this podcast, I thought The Way Forward was a very good title for this project, because for me, I'll tell you personally where I was is I had determined that politics is for the most part performative. I became hyper aware of that, especially after Trump's second term in office, when he started to the individual who ran as a repudiation of neoconservatism became the embodiment of it. I started to realize, well, it's the larger forces above our political system that really calls the shots. So, I mean, I got there and I was realizing, like, this is a problem with the bankers, with international finance. But for me, I was stuck there. And it's because I have all of these things that have been ingrained in me regarding anything that has distributing income in it. Like, this is a distributive system. So, like, in my mind right away, well, that's Marxism. We can't do that. But Douglas, there's a big difference between a national dividend, the way it works and functions, and what a lot of people call now a UBI, a universal basic income. So if you could, Oliver, could you differentiate between those two concepts?
Sure. So, a lot of people are talking now about a universal basic income. And there's no document I can point to prove this, but it's one of those things where it's so eerily close to what Douglas proposed, but then there's a twist, right? Because the conventional basic income people, by and large, there are some exceptions, but by and large, what they are proposing is that, everyone, let's say every citizen, should be receiving a certain amount of money from the government, let's say on a monthly basis, and it would be enough to guarantee their basic needs. But they're doing it from within the confines of the existing financial system, right? No one's talking about monetary reform in the common interest. So essentially, the only way you can fund a conventional basic income is through redistributive taxation. You've got to rob Peter to pay Paul, or by increasing the public debt. And of course, on the public debt, you've got to pay all this compound interest. Douglas said, because there's a gap, because the financial system is not self-liquidating, we can actually distribute an income delinked from work to everybody. But we don't have to rob Peter to pay Paul. It's not financed through taxation, and it's not financed by increasing the public debt. It's simply a matter of monetizing the surplus goods and services that are being produced, but for which no income has been automatically distributed. And that money would be issued free of any debt. So you're basically treating every citizen as if he were a shareholder in his economy. And since it's capital costs, capital charges that are mainly responsible for the gap, you're recognizing each citizen as an heir to the cultural heritage. Right? So this is, we have to be careful how we express things, because there's always sort of limitations and caveats. But one way you can think of it is the universalization of capitalism, that under social credit, we're all recognized as owners. And on that basis, the money that's necessary to fill the gap is a dividend. A dividend is a capitalist term. So there's that's one main difference. It's the financing, right? We're talking about monetary reform in the instance of the national dividend, not about trying to do more of the same within the existing system that just strengthens the monopoly of credit. The other difference, which is tightly bound up with this, is that, and Andre kind of mentioned this, the national dividend is not a guaranteed amount, right? As a lot of the basic income proposals, they'll say, oh, it's going to be $2,000 a month no matter what's happening in the economy. Because the national dividend is earmarked to fill a gap, the amount that each person receives each month is going to depend on the performance of the economy. The bigger the gap, the larger each person's share, the larger the dividend. So there's a feedback mechanism there. One objection that people have to any kind of income delinked from work is that if you were to give that to people, well, people would stop working. They'd stop contributing. In the Douglas system, if too many people withdraw from work, production will go down, and therefore the size of the dividend will get smaller, and that will make it more difficult to survive on the dividend alone. So that will serve as a feedback mechanism, right? So there's, because of the financing and because it's not guaranteed in any abstract sense, it depends on what the economy can afford. It's indexed to productivity. And this is part of getting the system to reflect reality. We're not going to pay you $2,000 just because somebody has stipulated that must be the value. We'll pay you $2,000 if that's what the economy requires in order to balance the flow of incomes with the flow of costs and prices. So it's all grounded in facts, in reality, not in some arbitrary policy that someone is imposing on the system.
So the benefits of this, it's interesting that it came out. Douglas's first writings were in 2017, because they knew that there was a transition coming with automation in manufacturing. And with the current setup, this was only going to benefit and consolidate the wealth and power of a very finite amount of people at the top of this power structure. So this is almost like, I think of the term when you were saying it makes people citizen shareholders. I was thinking how it's kind of antithetical to Klaus Schwab's stakeholder capitalism.
Mm.
This is more shareholder capitalism, which enfranchises the citizen. So I'm sorry I wasn't supposed to jump in there, Andre. You go ahead and
That's
you go.
that's that's perfect. That's perfect. Like you said, we're having a friendly conversation. Oliver mentioned something, the national dividend, and there's a quote from one book of Douglas. I will not read the entire quote, but I think I will just read the first part. If we imagine a country to be organized in such a way that the whole of its natural born inhabitants are interested in it in their capacity as shareholder, what Oliver was mentioning, holding the ordinary stock, which is inalienable and unsaleable. And such ordinary stock carries with it a dividend which collectively will purchase the whole of its product in excess of those required for maintaining of the production population. I will just end the quote there. It's much more long, but I think the idea also to distance ourselves from the concept of pure socialism or the social credit control system of the Chinese Communist Party is based on natural law, private property, profit, dividend, and Oliver mentioned it also. Those are terms that are characteristic of classical capitalism. You have dividend in a company if the company makes profit or if the company grows. And if the economy grows, your dividend should grow. If the economy does not fulfill the means of the consumption or does not balance with the consumption, your dividend will go down. And eventually you will have to either work or find a way to create, to balance this gap. One thing Oliver was mentioning, UBI. We're talking about UBI since maybe 5-6 years, but it was already they were already talking about basic income in the 60s in Quebec, because they were looking at the level of poverty and inequity in this society. Today, with AI and automatization, we should have more wealth. Of course, maybe less people who will work because of the automatization, but those people would have more time to develop their skill, more time to develop their knowledge, more time to pass with their family. It's not necessarily leisure. Developing humanity or developing a person needs time. And I think the system of Douglas, when it was created in 1917, was already seeing the benefit, because the industrial revolution, the first and the second industrial revolution, were putting people out of work.
Mm.
And he was seeing the inequity, and he was trying to understand where they were coming from. I think we will talk about this, maybe not today, but all the characteristic of the lack of purchasing power. There's many factors that will undermine the purchasing power of people. And maybe we will not talk about it today, but when we will go and we will try to understand why we don't have enough money, for example, to buy goods and services to live correctly, Douglas already identified those flaws in the system. So I think we are today. It's most probably, like you mentioned, John Paul, the first podcast, and maybe we will go deeper in the future. So at least people will understand what is the system. It is a complex system. I don't say it is not complex. It is well designed. It is not perfect, and I'm pretty sure that many people will maybe have very interesting question to challenge this doctrine.
Well, Oliver said something to me early on, and you expressed that once you start to see the world's problems through this framing, you can't see them any other way.
Mm-hmm.
You simply can't unsee this when you start to realize, like, this is predicated on this inherent deficiency in our system, and then there's a group of people that are exploiting that perpetually.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at now. So in this system, like, presently we have a Federal Reserve central banking system. They're a private banking interest that will loan our nation's money. Essentially, under a Douglas social credit system, this happens at the national level, correct?
Yeah. So Douglas, this is another sort of clarification. Douglas never proposed that we should nationalize the banking system. What he wanted to do was to break their monopoly on the creation of credit. The idea being that the gap should be filled by an organ of the state rather than relying on private banks to fill it. So in social credit literature, you'll read about the National Credit Office or the National Credit Authority. And that would be an organ of the state independent of the government of the day. And its task would be to keep a national set of books, a national balance sheet, and a national profit and loss account, and to basically measure the size of the gap and to distribute compensatory debt-free consumer credit directly to citizens in the form of the national dividend, and indirectly through the price discount. The idea there, I mean, there are different mechanisms that could be used, but the idea there is that if you went to the shop and you wanted to buy something, if the national discount rate were 20%, then if something's on sale for $100, you would pay $80, and the retailer would be reimbursed the $20 so that he can meet all of his costs. Or alternatively, the consumer could pay the $100 up front and the consumer could get the $20 rebate. But the point of the rebate is to lower price and thereby increase the purchasing power of the income that people have as a way of filling the gap. Because if you have a gap and you're not going to fill it with debt, you have two options. You increase purchasing power directly by increasing income, or you increase purchasing power by lowering prices, but you have to lower prices in such a way that the retailers are not out of pocket. They have to be able to cover their costs. So that I don't think that Douglas social credit in its broad outlines is really all that difficult to understand. The difficulty arises because it's out of the box thinking, and it relies on, I suppose you could say, a different philosophy and a different policy than the existing system. One thing that we've kind of touched on already is this whole phenomenon of tech labor displacement, right? We introduce machines, power-driven machinery, and now, intelligent machines, if I can call them that, in order to save labor. And the more capital-intensive production becomes, the fewer and fewer people are required to actually run the machines or supervise the machines. And, it might be the case that we don't want machines to do everything possible. There might be things that we prefer for human beings to do. But nevertheless, since the Industrial Revolution, we have, through tech labor displacement, basically been throwing people out of work. Now, the existing system has this axiom of full employment, right? It's got this idea that everyone's got to work for a living. And in physical terms, and this is where the out-of-the-box thinking comes, if you look at it in purely physical terms, if we can produce everything that we need to survive and flourish, with 25% of the labor force actually being employed, full-time, let's say, why are we insisting on full employment? It's inefficient. So you'll see already that a lot of existing jobs are useless, witless, redundant, and or destructive, but they exist because we've got to fill that gap. So the government will expand. It will have all sorts of programs. It will put people to work doing all sorts of things, a certain amount of it perhaps nonsense, but it distributes incomes. Those people, they would be unemployed without an income. And Douglas is saying that, this is madness. Why don't we just monetize the gap with debt-free credit, distribute it to people, in the form of a national dividend and forget all this make work. There's a tremendous amount of make work in the economy. We've got to keep everybody busy. And it's the stress of that is totally unnecessary. In real terms, it becomes necessary because under the financial system, the existing system, we've got to go into debt to fill the gap, and people have to earn that money. It can't be given freely as a dividend, as their share in the cultural heritage.
So I want to jump in briefly right now. We have about 110 people watching. It's absolutely crucial that you guys give this stream a share. The only reach I'm getting presently is organically, so it's very advantageous. And if you're enjoying this, I would very much appreciate it. With that said, too, I want to explain the format a little bit. We're going to talk for about an hour, so we'll do another 14 minutes of dialogue, and then I'm going to go to the questions. I see some good ones. So I just would ask people to bear with us. We will get there. And Andre, you take it away, my friend.
Well, Oliver was mentioning full employment and how to redistribute income, even for people who have, I would say, not interesting job. You go to work Monday morning. I'm sorry, a lot of people would prefer to stay at home with their children or do something else. Not being lazy. The word businessman or business, busy, being busy, keeping people busy because you have to pay them, because you want to provide income and fill the gap, like Oliver was mentioning. The fact that you produce more because automatization, industrial revolution, doesn't mean that your society will be lazy. You will bring or give time to people to do something else. Innovation doesn't come from nothing; it comes from thinking. And people who have more time, they have more time to think about a problem, a solution. And when you have a country, let's take Canada with 41.5, practically 42 million people, you have a lot of people who have really great ideas, but because they are working, and they are working because they need an income, they are not developing their full potential. And I think in the doctrine of Douglas was mentioning this idea of why do we have full employment? Because, like Oliver mentioned, filling the gap doesn't mean fixing the monetary system. Because again, I think one concept that is important is scarcity. We live in a society of abundance. Yet in Canada, for example, we throw thousands of liters of milk per month in the ditch for what? For, I will not go into politics, but the idea is to sustain a monopoly. And the monopoly could be the dairy cartel, or it could be the financial system. The idea is to have a monopoly. Why an entity has a monopoly on other human being? I think this is maybe the core element of the doctrine of Douglas. He was talking about breaking the monopoly, not breaking the concept of banking. The concept of banking, I can refer to the Glass-Steagall Act that was repealed, I think, in 1994. The Glass-Steagall Act was supposed to separate savings from investment and risk investment. When they repealed this act, suddenly you started to see the increase in national debt, because bankers, they were taking more and more risk, and they were lending more money and using this as leverage. I think today we have to discuss and debate the monetary system, and I think based on the doctrine of C.H. Douglas, it could be a very good start for debating. You were mentioning, John Paul, free market. That does not exist. Adam Smith, that does not exist. The invisible hand of the market, and I said this many times, it's the hand that is in your pocket. Mm-hmm. Because they manipulate the market and they create scarcity so they can increase their wealth and concentrate power, which is, in a way, I think you mentioned it sometimes, dictatorship.
Yeah, well, scarcity is kind of the carrot. the carrot that's in front of all of our faces, and that's what keeps the entire labor colony operative. So that's the transformative aspect of this economic model, is it's switching humanity from a scarcity model to one of abundance. And it reminds me of an Aldous Huxley quote. I believe it's from The Doors of Perception, where he says, when the doors of perception are cleansed, everything will appear to man as it is in its infinites. And I always thought that was profound. And when I learn about this system, I realized that scarcity mindset. That's almost like we've been conditioned to accept that, and everything has been hyper normalized. Like the whole corrupt system, people are so stuck and stagnant in this that they can't think outside of it. And that's kind of what you were mentioning, Oliver, about the outside of the box aspect of this type of a system. It's questioning all of these accepted premises that we all operate under, and I think they're flawed. I really do. I think like we've been led astray, and there's people that we use the ring of power metaphor frequently, like the allegory for wealth creation, and that's what it is. Like they don't want to lose this, and this is why I believe they're even talking about a UBI. Because they know if something doesn't equal out soon, there's going to be people with, I don't want to say revolutionary aspirations in a violent way. I'm very nonviolent, but there's going to be revolutionary thought, and it's going to catch on. And I believe this is definitely within the parameters of that, relative to how transformative and ultimately very beneficial for society it will be. You go ahead, Oliver.
Yeah. I would imagine that most of our viewers are probably Canadian. Is that a fair assumption?
Mostly Canadians, I would say.
Mostly Canadian. So if you're watching this and you're hearing about Douglas social credit for the first time, you might want to ask yourself, why? How is that possible? Why do I say that? Because in 1935, in the middle of the Great Depression, the first social credit government was elected in Alberta. Right? Bible Bill Aberhart, William Aberhart, won a majority in 1935, basically promising to introduce the Douglas social credit monetary reform on a provincial level. Now, they tried for many, many years. Aberhart died in 1943. But for the time that he was in power, they attempted through various means to introduce Douglas's proposals or some aspect of them. And every time that they made an attempt, some higher authority thwarted them. So, sometimes it was the Lieutenant Governor General, sometimes it was the Supreme Court, sometimes it was the federal government. In some cases, they even tried to appeal to the Privy Council in London, and they were successfully thwarted. The argument being that you're just a province, you do not have, according to the terms of the British North America Act, you don't have jurisdiction over the money system, over banking, and so forth. But the point I'm making is this was a huge part of Canadian history. And the world, we wouldn't be in the mess we were in had Aberhart succeeded somehow. Because Alberta and Canada, for that matter, would have been a light to the rest of the world. There were also, social credit governments, nominal social credit governments in British Columbia from about, early 50s to even to the 90s, right? And don't hold this against us necessarily, but Kim Campbell, Canada's first and only female prime minister, got her start in politics as a member of the Social Credit Party, and which was the governing party here in British Columbia in the 1980s. Now, if you were to ask her what is social credit, she's still alive. If you were to ask her what is social credit, I doubt she could tell you, because over time, the social credit parties, they were unable to implement any of Douglas's ideas, and so little by little they sort of morphed into conventional center-right parties. But even in the Canadian federal parliament, after the 1962 election, there were 30 odd MPs in the federal parliament, social credit MPs, and they held the balance of power. You have to look at all of this history and say, how is it that social credit was such a significant movement in this country, and yet hardly anybody knows anything about it, or if they know something about social credit, they now know about the wrong kind, right? The globalist Chinese inversion, perversion. One thing I should mention before anyone gets any bad ideas, Douglas himself was actually opposed to the formation of a political party as a vehicle for implementing social credit for a number of reasons. And I think he was correct about that. What is required is a non-partisan movement. The minute you form a party, party politics, given the inner logic of how it operates, if you form a social credit party, you're automatically putting the other parties on the back foot. You're putting them on the defensive, where they basically have to say, well, they have to be anti-social credit. Social credit is for everybody. It's in everyone's interest, except perhaps that small oligarchy, plutocracy at the top of the social pyramid. But I would say even for them, it's in their interest, because how much real development is stifled under the existing financial economic order that then ricochets and has a negative effect even on them. So party politics, the political system, is something that also needs to be looked at. And Douglas had quite elaborate ideas too about what's wrong with the political system and what should be done to reform it. But certainly, although we had social credit parties in this country and some of them tried to do something good, Douglas himself was not in favor of political parties as the due strategy for getting social credit. What we need to do is to put pressure on the existing MPs, regardless of party, and say, you will only be supported if you support monetary reform in the common interest. I mean, it's baffling, really. If you look at the road system, the transportation networks, that's societal infrastructure. Why should that work for the benefit of a small clique? Shouldn't it work in everyone's interest, in the common interest? Well, the same is true of the money system. It should, if it's to fulfill its purpose properly, well, it should work in the interest of the common citizen, regardless of who you are, right? Beyond the Rawlsian veil of ignorance, no matter who you are, the system should be working for you, not working for a small elite at our expense. And of course, it doesn't end there, because when you have the tremendous concentration of wealth and power in such few hands, and that they've got all the material riches that they could desire, well, what's next? What's next is power and the abuse of power. So this is really a problem that needs to be solved, and solved quickly, regardless of what other topic or issue or problem that you're concerned about. It's either caused by the existing dishonest and dysfunctional money system, or it's exacerbated by it. And we're not going to be able to address any of those things unless you go to the core matter, which is the money system.
I like that. It's like Gramsci. It's a Gramsci quote of all people, but politics is downstream of culture. This is something you hear frequently now, because it's very true. A cultural movements to influence our political system is the way to approach this, I believe. So at this point, I think it would be good to switch over to the question section. So we got a quick honorable mention. Clown World, thanks for reposting the stream, which provides me with a perfect segue to appeal to the audience once again. If you guys can please share this, it's very advantageous. Even though we're towards the end, we get most of our views after the live broadcast, so it still helps. And this one is directly for you, Oliver. Does Dr. Oliver Heydorn have an X account?
Yes, all right. So I run a website, socred.org, SOCRED.org, and it has a an X account, so the C.H. Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit. You should be able to find it easily enough.
Excellent. So now we're going to get into the questions here. I'm going to read it out. I will hand it right over to you, Oliver, and then Andre, you could weigh in on it, and then I will, if I can answer it, I will lend my 2 cents as well. So the first question: while it's certainly inimical to collectivism or top-down command socialism, it does have guild socialist roots via Orage New Age periodical. Economic democracy is a useful alternative description.
All right. Well, Orage, who was the editor of the New Age, who basically gave Douglas a platform, is the first person to give Douglas a platform to express his ideas. He was a guild socialist, that is true. However, if you read an article that he wrote called An Editor's Progress, which explains how it took him a year to fully understand what Douglas was talking about. He studied it for a year and wrestled with it for a year until he came out and saw the light and said Douglas is correct. He says in that article, in Editor's Progress, that the only idea from guild socialism that survived the confrontation with this new idea of social credit was the idea of functionalism, by which he meant that, it's very Aristotelian, really. What's the purpose of the economy? What's the purpose of the financial system? In orthodox economics, the whole idea of purpose tends to get lost. Like, why are we even doing this? Why do we even have a financial system? What's the objective we're trying to achieve? If you have no idea of the goal, then you're not in a position to evaluate the means and say this is an appropriate means for reaching this goal, or it's not an appropriate means. So this idea of function, of purpose, he said that's the only thing from the guild socialist heritage that actually survived. So I would take exception to Bob's comment and say that even there, there's a break between sort of the guild socialist heritage and social credit. Having said that, reality is complicated, right? It requires nuance. The socialists have many legitimate concerns. We're not taking issue with their concerns. Poverty is a real concern. Why should there be poverty if, in physical terms, we're perfectly capable of eradicating it? It doesn't make any sense. If there's no physical scarcity, why do we have poverty? What could be done to eradicate it? Exploitation is a legitimate concern, right? Environmental degradation, these are all legitimate concerns. The effect of a corrosive crony capitalist, finance capitalist, monopoly capitalist system on society, on culture, these are all legitimate concerns that many socialists have. So we share those concerns. We don't say that that's nonsense. We just say that there's a better way of addressing them than your standard socialist proposes. This way of addressing them that gets the root problem that is not socialist.
Good answer. So I'm going to bring it back up, Andre, just to remind you, and you can have a go at this one if you would like.
Well, I will be short. I will just say, he's referring to economic democracy. And the idea of the podcast, also, the way forward, is to be able to propose solution to a common problem. We are able, whether we would be on the left side of the political spectrum or the right side, I think we all agree that debt is not sustainable. And monopoly is not a way to control or to make economy flourish. I will just read one quote from the book of Dr. Oliver Heydorn, Social Credit Economic, because this quote was everywhere in his book. And I will read: the true purpose of economic association, which is important, is twofold: to deliver the goods and services which individuals desire, and to do this with the least amount of trouble to anyone, end quote. I think it's important because people could have they could criticize the system or the doctrine of Douglas. But like Dr. Heydorn mentioned, it's non-partisan. We try to identify problem in a society that is facing existential, I would say, threat. Debt is not sustainable. This system does not work. We would implement socialism tomorrow, it would not work either, because you would still concentrate power in the hands of a few individuals. You would get rid of private property, which means that you would always depend on the states. So that's not a way to empower or to inspire people. People, they need freedom. They need to be able to express themselves. And I think we can accept the critic, and because it is a base for debate. I think it's important.
So Bob's comment was definitely beyond my pay grade and knowledge, considering I've only been familiar with this theory for about a month now. So I'm going to skip answering that and move on to the next question. So this is from Johnny Tightlips. I heard about this system years ago and followed Douglas' social credit account, but somewhat dismissed / didn't see much from the account, no doubt due to suppression. Perhaps it needs a rebrand. Douglas decentralized social credit. So it's along a similar lines as Bob was alluding to, like economic democracy. It kind of is a different way of expressing it, or a rebranding, so to speak. What are your thoughts on that, Oliver?
Well, I think those of us who've been sort of at it for a long time, who are sort of steeped in the social credit literature, the history of the movement, we're rather attached to the term social credit. And it's not a sentimental thing, not a purely sentimental thing. Social credit is something that has different meanings. It can refer to different things. But the core meaning of it really is this idea that when people work together in society, we can accomplish things that none of us could accomplish by ourselves, right? So there's an unearned increment of association that is produced whenever people associate for a purpose. And that is the social credit. Some societies have a lot of social credit and they're more functional. And other societies, the social credit is weak. And the whole purpose of the social credit movement is to strengthen the social credit to, through appropriate mechanisms, financial reform, etc., to enable society to fulfill its purpose, its common purpose, effectively, efficiently, fairly, to optimize that power that we have working together on the sake of some common end. So it's like the perfect term to describe the phenomenon that Douglas was looking at, and for that reason, we're sort of attached to it. Having said that, I do recognize that politics is the art of the possible, and maybe there is some way we can judo what this globalists and the CCP have done by taking over our term, or perhaps there is some sort of rebrand that could be used to get traction, to generate a buzz, to popularize it, that doesn't stray too far from the original ideas and inspiration.
Go ahead, Andre. You want to give that one a whirl?
Well, just one thing, decentralized, the expression, or the Douglas social credit, decentralized, explaining also that this system does decentralize and not concentrate. I would say not system doctrine or philosophy, if you prefer, does not concentrate power. That's the total opposite of this system. And I think, like Oliver mentioned, the art of possible is trying to have a debate and try to at least to convince people to understand the system. After that, if it would be important to rebrand, maybe we would agree on this, but keeping the history of the movement.
I agree. So just to put that in perspective a little bit about some of the discrepancies with this, despite us explaining thoroughly at the beginning of the broadcast, we have a comment here from JC Denton. I was a big fan, JP, but I'm surprised that you were pushing Chinese social credit scheme. So he does redeem himself in his subsequent questions. he kind of realized this. We have
Oops.
here, this is a series. Wait, Canada had social credit in the 60s. Well, not technically. We had social credit parties. And here's the question. So is there a relation between unsound money, example, Keynesianism, Fabian socialism, and judicial corruption, example, activist judges? And would social credit remedy this? It's a good question.
Well, I think there certainly is a connection between the existing financial system that centralizes wealth, and privilege, and power in the hands of a few, and all forms of societal corruption, including the particular example that's mentioned there. Because if you centralize money, money is a type of power. If you centralize it unnaturally, well, Lord Acton said, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." So if you centralize it unnaturally, as we do under the existing system, it will be used, it will be abused, it will be used to further centralize unnaturally other forms of power in the hands of the same people who benefit from the operation of the system. So whether that's through influencing appointments, judicial appointments, by controlling, influencing political parties, because political parties depend on money to run a campaign, right? Whether it's you're talking about the media, the sort of things that the media produces, it does really go back to that whole idea of the power of money under a dishonest, dysfunctional system is the one ring to rule them all, right? How can you have, let's say, the judicial system fulfill its true purpose as an independent, impartial entity if with the financial system and the way the political system operates, you're basically putting judicial appointments in the hands of people who benefit from the existing unnatural concentration of power? I mean, it would be a miracle if corruption did not intensify.
Mm-hmm.
You would expect exactly what we see.
That's a good answer. Andre, you want to give this one a whirl?
Well, I think would social credit remedy this? You need to associate, I would say, social credit or economic democracy with a moral code, moral law based on behavior of individual. We see today that the system is corrupt because money drives the economy and drive politics. If money does not drive politics because you have a more fair system, and let's say, for example, the national dividend and the initial dividend, people are not always threatening by scarcity. Maybe they will behave more differently. They will not be afraid to lose their job, or if they don't work, they will not be afraid to lose their income. They will be able to live decently. So I think it could help in a way. I don't know if implementing the system would improve moral behavior. I think it would, but I think it goes hand in hand with a reflection, thinking about our actual justice system. I think it goes together.
Mm-hmm.
And you're mute, John Paul.
I knew I was going to catch myself doing that. So give me one moment here. So we have another comment from Bob. The credit of the nation belongs to the nation, and there is not the slightest reason why the nation should have to pay rent for its own credit. Ezra Pound. Now, Ezra Pound was a proponent of Douglas social credit, as was, I'm hearing, Charlie Chaplin. Is that accurate, Oliver?
Yeah, Charlie Chaplin was sympathetic to Douglas. In his autobiography, he credited Douglas with basically saving his fortune because he had read Douglas. Douglas was predicting that there would be a financial crash, which of course happened in 1929. And Charlie Chaplin said that he made all his investments liquid ahead of time, and it was basically from having read Douglas that he was able to save his fortune. But there were there were a number of artists, literary figures, and other prominent people who were either social creditors or at the very least sympathetic to Douglas's message. And T.S. Eliot, Storm Jameson, there's so many that could be mentioned, and all of this unfortunately has been thrown down the Orwellian memory hole.
Well, it makes sense that it's been memory holed, because it probably represents the biggest threat to the establishment that there is, because there's no way, it's like I said, for me personally, I wrestle with this still, and it's winning. Every time I try to poke holes in it logically, or the soundness of this theory, I'm coming up short. I can't make a solid argument against it. So I mean, and that's what led me to thinking about doing this project. It would be nice to put out a formal invitation to anyone who wants to come on this show with the three of us, and we will be very cordial and receptive to your arguments, and we'll have a civil discussion about this, because I would like to see if anyone can poke holes in this, to be quite honest, because I certainly can't. I think this is a viable way forward for sure. So Andre, do you want to have any comments on that?
Yes, I want, because I want to illustrate the modesty of Dr. Heydorn based on this quote from Ezra Pound, because Dr. Heydorn helped Ted Wisniewski wrote a book. The title is When the Light and the Light Became So Bright. And I thought Oliver would mention it, but I like the quote, because the nation, the credit of the nation belongs to the nation. So the fact that, not nationalizing the central bank, but having an independent organization that would either have the control of the money. We look at the central bank today, it's supposed to be independent, but is it really independent? Because you have what over the central bank? You have the Bank of International Settlement. So do they really, are they really independent? So I would like to just to mention that this book is available. Maybe Oliver, you can just talk about it briefly.
Yes. So we recently published a book it's mainly the work of Lorne Wisniewski, who was the erstwhile leader of the Federal Social Credit Party in the late 1970s. And it's looking at the influence, the extensive influence of C.H. Douglas and social credit on the writings of Ezra Pound. I do have a chapter in there, chapter 1, explaining very, very briefly what social credit is all about, as well as an appendix that is looking at not just the financial and economic dimensions, but a bit of Douglas's political theory, historical theory, philosophy, etc. So that book is available through Aroka Press, which is based in Waterloo. You should be able to find it easily enough through a Google search. But yeah, that's a new publication.
Excellent. So we have a comment from Helen. Douglas's model allows for ultimate decentralization, the antidote to globalism and its evils. So what are your thoughts on that, Oliver?
I agree completely. I think, honestly, that Douglas social credit is the antidote to the New World Order, right? It's the antidote to the centralization of financial, economic, political, social, cultural power in the hands of a globalist oligarchy. And yeah, as you say, I think that's one reason why all knowledge of it has been so suppressed. Because the minute enough people engage with these sorts of ideas, I think the cat is out of the box. And the whole empire that they're trying to establish, which Douglas said was, it's an exercise in megalomania. It goes against the natural grain of reality. It cannot succeed. The only question is, what are they going to put us through between now and the realization that it's doomed to fail? So the sooner we get this sort of information out there, the more quickly that failure must become evident to everybody, and we can actually get onto something more sensible.
Good answer. Andre?
Well, the antidote to globalism, and I think the goal of this podcast, John Paul, when you ask us to join you and start something, is to be able to promote the doctrine, explain it, and provide people with a good critical thinking. The alternative to the dystopian world. This podcast is the way forward. It is not necessarily the way forward of globalism. So we have to provide a good solution or a good system and explain it. And after that, if people believe in it, they will engage, they will promote it. I would like to give hope to people with this system.
That's my plan. I'm frequently accused of being a black pill because I'm constantly providing like diagnosis without a prognosis. And that's because one truthfully eluded me. I could break down exactly all of the problems with our system, but I was unaware of this specific solution, which for me was very transformative. And again, I'll repeat myself, but it's very relevant. Like I can't see this any other way now. So that's why I've converted. Like it's like, okay, well, this is a viable way forward, a trajectory that alleviates some of our biggest problems: war, inequity, corruption. And I think it definitely will lead to less corruption. Again, it's not entirely like a utopian ideal that we don't need people suffering in poverty. Like that's the big thing as someone from the right or the more libertarian side of things, as I would have been. I had to really struggle with that because, like I said, every instinct I'm told, like once you talk about dealing with inequity, it's like that's wrong, that's Marxist, that's socialist, and that's what I really had to break in my own mind to be able to see past it. But once you do, you can't go back. There's no unseeing this. So I think it's very relevant, and I look forward to future episodes and actually introducing this to people because I needed this. I didn't know about it, but and I didn't know that I required it. And this has given me a whole new lease on this whole struggle, like coming onto social media, doing podcasts, and constantly doom and gloom, like, oh, the bankers, they're going to put us in a technocratic system and we're going to have central banking digital currency and all of these like dystopian themes. It's like this is refreshing. Like this is an alternative to that. So I think it's she's absolutely accurate in her description there. So we have Mr. Gary. W.A.C. Bennett led the party from 1952 to 1972, serving as premier and establishing a populist, development-focused government. Bennett's leadership emphasized infrastructure expansion and resource development. Any thoughts, Oliver?
Yeah, so he's referring there to the British Columbia social credit premier, who was, again, by this stage, they were unable, because of the problems that Alberta faced, they were unable to actually introduce Douglas's monetary reform proposals. So instead, they tried to govern as best as they could within the conventional confines of the system. And I know a lot of people in British Columbia were quite happy with especially with Bennett's government. He was in power for 20 years. They must have been fairly satisfied with what he was doing in within the confines of the system. So that speaks well to the sort of ideals that animated the social credit movement, that politics being the art of the possible, they did the best that they could under difficult circumstances.
That seems to be a similar theme to what happened with the social credit movement in Alberta. It's like in order for this monetary reform can't happen at a provincial or even a national level. Really, like, you know what I mean? Like it has to come from the culture, as you said. That's why a political party is not likely the best conduit for introducing this, or definitely for implementing it. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, establishing a populist development focused government, maybe we will talk about subsidiarity eventually, because the idea of decentralizing the monetary system and breaking the monopoly is one core characteristic of the system of Douglas. So again, I go with this idea. Give back power to people. They're intelligent. They will know if you give them power. If you give them power, if you give them time to think, time to organize, they will unite. And maybe politics sometimes works, but most of the time it is based on opposition. And this is where people, they will become embedded. They're following a party. They're following a party line, and they cannot get out of this party line. I think the system of Douglas is also a way to re-give power to people.
Very good.
To unite people, to give them something that they can unite around, regardless of prior political associations.
So we have another one from Mr. Denton. I think I know Mr. Denton.
I know Mr. Denton.
Real identity. I won't reveal it. But prior to 1973, the BOC provided interest-free loans. Would this not make social credit unnecessary?
Okay, that's a good question. So we didn't talk about this so much, but according to Douglas's analysis, the charging of interest is not the core cause behind the recurring price-income gap. So, apart from what you're talking there about the Bank of Canada providing interest-free or very low interest loans for, I guess, public infrastructure development. If you were to eliminate interest, the charging of interest entirely from the system, costs and prices are still going to be generated faster than incomes are distributed, because the core cause has to do with the nature of real capital. When you incorporate capital, machines, equipment into production, you're generating at least two streams of cost. You've got the loan that has to be repaid, the capex component, but you also have depreciation and maintenance. The machines or the equipment, it's got to be replaced eventually after it's worn out. So you've got a situation where capital is generating all these costs, but over and against those costs, you only have the incomes that were distributed in the initial, let's say, manufacture of the real capital. And even in that case, those incomes are not going to be enough to cover even one set of charges, say the capex charges. So if you can conceive of a capital intensive economy, it means that you've got all this money that's going in to the capital stream, if you will, and it's not coming out at the same rate that it's being put in. It's not coming out to consumers in the form of wages, salaries, and dividends at the same rate that it needs to be collected by productive organizations. And that's just the nature of capital industrial development. And it seems that before Douglas pointed this out, that nobody was really aware of it. And so that there was a technical flaw at the basis of the system. People assumed all costs are distributable as concurrent income. Well, that would be the case in a hand labor economy, right? Possibly. Where, let's say, you only have human labor, so you pay someone $100 to cut the grass with a scissors or something, but that's equipment, but nevertheless, or to pull weeds. And so there's a cost on that service, but all of the cost is being transformed into an income. So the two sides balance. But the minute you have capital, real capital, you put that into the equation, the balance is upset. And again, the only way we can fill it under the existing system, debt, which is a debt-only system for all intents and purposes, there are exceptions, is to get someone to borrow the needed purchasing power. So, I mean, the simplest way you can think of the existing system is, we're being charged $100 a month for production. We're only paid $60, so we have to put the $40 on credit. And this also explains why over time the debt level is steadily rising. It also explains inflation, but we probably should do a separate show just on inflation.
And that's a really good question, but I don't want to scare off people who are just tuning in that aren't as familiar with some of the intricacies of it, because it is like a lot of macroeconomical concepts. I don't want to scare people off because the core concepts are very, very easy to grasp. So I just want to remind people, like, don't let some of the technical talk intimidate you into learning more about this system. So I'm going to where we were looking at coming in at about an hour and a half for the episode. So we're towards the end of that. If you gentlemen are all right, I wouldn't mind going a bit later for this first episode, just because there's some really good questions here. In the future, I think we will cut the chit chat. We'll cut the discourse off at about 45 minutes, and then we'll do questions, because the questions are probably the best part, right? Getting that interaction and actually answering and addressing some people's concerns. So that's definitely what we will do in the future. So we have another one from Mr. Denton. There are 4 countries outside of the BIS: Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela, with the latter 2 about to join. What strategy do you propose to survive their inevitable attack?
Well, when it comes to questions of strategy, our in-house expert is Mr. Andre Meloche. So I will hand that over to you, Andre, if you have any ideas as to.
Well, I do, but maybe I can just touch a little bit based on the previous question about the Bank of Canada. Interest-free loan, 1973. Don't forget that 1973, the gold standard was abandoned. So currencies started to float against each other, and the country had to finance his program or his budget on the international market. It doesn't change nothing today if you have it based on gold standard, because it will still create scarcity. It's not about gold or about silver. It's about knowledge. It's about sharing and having sovereignty. I think I will not go deep in it, because I think we need a monetary reform. We need to be able to discuss about it. And the doctrine of Douglas is a really, really strong system, quite complex if you go into detail, quite easy if you understand, if you try to summarize it. So I will keep it there for this question. For the next question, the Bank of International Settlement, of course, those countries are or were, we think about Venezuela today, but those countries are out of the Bank International Settlement. So they are independent. So I think they are resisting something. What would be the strategy to survive, in my opinion, is to be able to explain to people why do a nation has to control its money. Control its money, controlling the amount of money in circulation, creating deflation, or like Oliver mentioned, always liquidating this money. And if you liquidate too much, you will create deflation. I think we have to build this strategy. But the first strategy is to explain to people, even macroeconomy, if you take the right words, it's not that complicated. We have to demystify those terms. Sometimes people are afraid of those terms. When you give them a good definition and some simple analogy, people are not stupid. I think they are able to understand that, first of all, the debt is not sustainable. Creating money out of nothing and asking people to pay back for something that they don't have. And Oliver mentioned, I will end on this, the interest rate or the loan that is not the core problem. It's the monopoly that is. And I think Douglas was more willing to break this monopoly.
Mm-hmm. He also said something very interesting. I'm sort of paraphrasing from memory, but he said basically that no power can stand against an informed public opinion. right? So there are several obstacles and difficulties, but the center of gravity of power does in some fundamental sense lie with the people, right? Because if the people see certain things and understand certain things, the only way the ruling class can get away with self-serving policies to engage in trickery. And if the people become more informed about these sorts of basic questions, it will become more and more difficult for them to play those tricks. And I think we can only force an evolution in a positive direction the more informed people become.
Yes, there's a perpetual reciprocal dynamic between the people and the ruling class. And even the most subservient people will reach their tipping point with increasing subjugation, increasing poverty. It's like when people have nothing left to lose, they tend to lose it. And history has shown us this. The power is definitely resides with the people for sure. So with that said, we have about 200 people watching. So I will appeal once more. If you guys could please share this stream, it's very advantageous for us. And I will remind everyone that we're going to be doing this every week, Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you enjoy this, let people know, share it, send it to people, help us out in any way you can. It's very helpful for us. So we have one from Shareware here. There's a few. So just to kind of reduce it, I'm gonna flash the three of them and then we'll kind of address it. So University of Victoria communists would agree with social credit. On the surface, it seems similar. I wouldn't say that. You would lead that the distributive aspect of it would lead people to that misconception. But with that said, I think this appeals to the left and the right, which I think is mostly a divisive tactic in modern politics. I don't think ideological uniformity is not necessary. We have both sides that want to impose their own orthodoxy essentially on the other side, and that's not getting us anywhere because our main problems stem from monetary reform. But the second one, I'm gonna, sorry, I answered that after I said I wasn't going to. I'm gonna flash the three and then I'm gonna hand it over to you. Most of the population are non-thinking. Acting in good faith is unlikely in a world that has lost moral grounding. And then the third comment is, no, people want security and to be told. We've lost the physical sense of rational thinking. So Oliver, if you want to address that.
Yeah, regarding the Victoria communists, historically, the communists were some of the greatest enemies of the Douglas social credit movement. And we were some of their greatest enemies also. So Elon Musk, his Canadian grandfather, was high up in the social credit movement in Saskatchewan in the 1940s. This is after he left technocracy. Douglas was very critical of technocracy. He wrote about it, wrote against it. So we assume that Joshua Haldeman's conversion, quote unquote, to social credit was genuine, was sincere. But he actually gave a speech, which you can find online, a good speech. It's quite interesting, on the CBC in 1948, and it was basically saying that social credit is the way to defeat communism. Right? The social credit, Douglas social credit, and communism are incompatibles. Why? Because people who work in a social credit economy, they will have wages and they will have salaries, and not everybody is being paid the same. And people that run businesses will make a profit. And we have private property. I mean, social credit is basically free enterprise plus an honest financial system. That's the model. So how that can be, I don't think the communists, they might be converted, they might become social creditors, but their vision of society is totally antithetical to ours, right? There's no central planning in Douglas social credit. There's nobody saying what should be produced or who should produce it or who should get what. So I take exception to that.
And that's accurate, but that's the instinct, right? It's like I was saying, my hardest part with initially learning about this system was that aspect. well, it's what I would have classified as almost like it has a socialist element, but it doesn't. It's just above that. It addresses the root causational aspects of our problem. And I mean, that's what people have to realize. It's not of the left or the right. It's far beyond that limited framing, in my estimation.
Right.
So, Andre, do you have any comments regarding that?
Well, I was referring to the Garden of Eden at the beginning of the podcast, and the idea, we were stuck in those vocabulary: communism, socialism, capitalism. And when you look when you go deep in the system, you understand that it is a system, exactly what Oliver was mentioning. It is a system that is based on private property, profit, productivity, wealth for everybody, and a decent, honest monetary system. If you associate those two things, you will touch moral values. I think it's important. Maybe, Oliver, you can just touch this little anecdote with
Yes.
Vladislav Molotov, who was a Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yes,
that's quite interesting. Just for the purpose of saying that communists, they were quite afraid.
Yeah, so the Dean of Canterbury, at one point in time, who was a social creditor, had gone over to Moscow. This is during the Soviet Union. And he spoke to a member of Stalin's inner cabinet, who happened to be Molotov, after whom the Molotov
Vladislav
cocktail,
Molotov, yes,
was named. And he said to him, have you heard of this thing that we have in England? Douglas social credit. Have you heard of this system? And Molotov reportedly said to him, social credit, we know all about it. It is the one theory in the world of which we are afraid. Because if you solve the problems, the concerns that socialists have regarding poverty, exploitation, environmental degradation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if you solve those problems on social credit lines, that's the end of socialism. No one will support socialism anymore. That's the end of communism. So they need to have, they don't want solutions. They don't want real solutions. They need to have perpetual dissatisfaction in order to use it as leverage for their own power. And now regarding the other things that were mentioned, I do think you're right. It is of course not enough to just have a system. You have to have a moral population. Right, so no one is saying that the social credit system is a panacea, that it's going to solve everything. The only way we could get it really is if people stand up and take an interest in truth and try to care about questions of rationality and justice and functionality. If people are not going to be concerned about these things, well, it's game over, right? It takes individuals through moral conversion, spiritual conversion, to actually align themselves with ideas and systems and institutions that would serve the common good, the common interest.
And I think her assessment is very accurate. But I mean, where she says like people want security and to be told, that's very true. People look to the government to basically fill every need they have. They think that's the functional premise for government at this point. We're like late stage demoralization.
Yeah.
But that's what this project is about. We're here to tell people. We're here to tell people and to wake them up a little bit. And there is a logos to consider. Like we're going through some semblance of an awakening. Like we're at least all very hyper aware that we're at the end of something. Like the Ponzi scheme that is our current monetary system is coming to an end. So change is inevitable. Is it going to be good change or bad change? Which is a paraphrase of a Douglas quote. So I mean, we're here to tell people to be rational. That's the premise.
Yeah, that's right. I might even say that, as I see it, it boils down to two choices. Either we move in a Douglas social credit direction, monetary form in line with reality and the natural law, in service of the common interest, or we're going to end up with a CBDC plus conventional UBI plus Chinese social credit plus digital ID dystopia. Now, mark of the beast dystopia. Who wants that? I don't want that. presumably 99% of the population don't really want that as much as they might want security and be told what to do. I think another aspect of this is the present system is very demoralizing. And maybe people are the way they are because they have realized the system is not operating on a level playing field, and it's stacked against them from the get-go. So throw up your hands in despair. The whole thing is a joke, in other words. So how can you take anything seriously?
Yes, I agree. So we went about 15 minutes over what we had planned. So I think we should end it there. But I just want to ask everyone once again, I hate to be so repetitive, but it's the only way we get reach, is if you guys could please share this. It's very helpful to what we're endeavoring to do and accomplish with this podcast. So I want to grab one more comment just because it's funny. 200 live viewers, that's more than your morning shows with the charismatic Payman Ascari. So that might be some insight to Mr. Denton's identity. But with that said, I'll start with you, Andre. Do you have any parting words for our first episode?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here with you and Oliver. And the idea of this podcast is try to explain, vulgarize, and demystify some concept about economy, especially in our time. I think there's a window of opportunity. The system is 100-year-old. It was suppressed for many reasons. It's not for nothing, because when you challenge people in power, they don't want to lose this power. We're not threatening anybody. We're just saying, maybe if you advocate for a fair society, act for it. Just don't pander or try to oppose people. And that's what you're trying to do, John Paul, in your podcast also. And that's it. I think I'm very happy, especially the questions were very good.
Yeah, in the future, we're going to do more questions, because we had a lot of really good questions. Some we unfortunately couldn't get to. But I just want to remind people again, every Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern, live to X and YouTube. And on YouTube, it's under my channel, Dumb the Wiser. So, Oliver, do you have any parting words for our viewers?
Well, I'd like to invite everyone to take a close look at this and to engage it, because having dedicated so much of my life to it, I know that there's incredible richness in Douglas's writings. I believe that C.H. Douglas was a genius, first-rate genius, perhaps even one of the greatest geniuses of the 20th century. If we lived in a just world, instead of having streets and schools in various parts of the world named after Karl Marx, we would have them named after C.H. Douglas. So it's very rewarding. It can only, I suppose, improve your acuity and your sense for what actually is going on in the world, and how we might actually resolve all of these social problems. And so welcome to everyone. Welcome on board. It's something to look at seriously. And thank you, JP, for making all of this possible.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure, man. I believe it was Providence that brought me towards this system and meeting you gentlemen. Now, I'd known Andre for a while now, but actually getting to meet you guys in Rougemont and study this system, it's been an absolute blessing for me. So I would like to thank the two of you as well, and everyone for watching. So, I mean, there's a perfect time for things to be implemented. And this idea, perhaps, as much as it would have benefited society, maybe the world wasn't ready for it. Mm-hmm. At this point, at this junction, I truly believe that this is the way forward. So with that said, we'll leave it there, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for coming out. Cheers.
Thank you.